Hey guys, tonight we are going to talk about flowers, but not just any flowers. We're diving into a time when a single petal could be worth more than your entire life savings. We're journeying back to the 17th century Netherlands to witness the birth of a phenomenon so bizarre it's still debated today. The Tulip Mania. And if you were suddenly dropped into this world with your modern-day sensibilities, you might accidentally trade your entire fortune for what looks like a fancy onion dot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet, no-pressure way to support the channel. Also, feel free to drop a comment below with your city and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is damp and smells of wet earth and the distant, salty tang of the North Sea. You pull your thick wool cloak a little tighter around your shoulders. It's the late 16th century, and you're standing in the city of Leiden, a place buzzing with trade, new ideas, and a quiet, industrious energy. You're not here for the canals or the cheese market, though you've heard whispers of a new garden, a hortus botanicus, tended by a brilliant but famously grumpy botanist named Carolus Clusius. You walk through the gates, and it's a world of meticulously organized green. Plants from every known corner of the globe are arranged in neat, orderly beds. But then you see it. Tucked away in a private, almost hidden corner of the garden is a splash of color that doesn't belong. It's unlike any flower you've ever seen. It's not a soft, wild thing like a daisy or a rose. This flower is sculpted. It stands tall and proud on a single, straight stem, its petals forming a perfect, deep cup. The color is a red so intense it seems to drink the sunlight, a velvety texture that you can almost feel just by looking at it. You've just seen your first tulip dot at this moment. It's not a commodity, it's a secret, a private obsession. You might see the old Clusius himself, a stooped figure with dirt under his fingernails, muttering to his precious bulbs. He guards them jealously. These aren't just plants to him. They are jewels from a faraway land, the culmination of a long and winding journey. This specific flower, a mainstream historical fact that grounds our story, arrived here through a chain of curious and wealthy men. Clusius received his first bulbs from a diplomat, Ogier de Busbecq, who had served in the court of the Ottoman Sultan in Constantinople. And here's a little piece of trivia for you. The flower's name is born from a misunderstanding when Busbecq first saw the blooms worn in the turbans of Turkish officials. He asked what they were called. His interpreter, thinking he was pointing at the headwear, gave him the Turkish word for turban, tulban. The name stuck, evolving into tulip. So, for its entire European history, this flower has been named after a hat, a rather elegant silken hat, but a hat nonetheless. You watch the flower, mesmerized by its simple, bold form. It feels alien. Exotic, it speaks of distant, sun-drenched empires and incredible wealth, a stark contrast to the flat, grey skies of Holland. You can understand Clusius's obsession. He refuses to sell any bulbs for money, only sharing them with a select circle of fellow botanists and wealthy patrons who he believes will appreciate their scientific, not monetary value. He sees them as wonders of nature, not coins waiting to be minted, but secrets, especially beautiful ones, have a way of getting out. People talk. A gardener mentions it to his wife, who mentions it to the baker, who mentions it to a merchant's assistant. Thieves, legend has it, scale the walls of the hortus at night, digging up these precious onions from the soil. The demand begins as a quiet, intense whisper among the elite. To have a tulip in your garden is to show you are not just rich, but connected. You have taste. You are part of a very exclusive club. And here historians still scratch their heads and argue, why here? Why the Netherlands? Was it simply a case of a new, beautiful thing arriving at the right time in a newly rich country? Or did this flower, with its bold, clean lines and vibrant, unapologetic colors, tap into something deeper in the Dutch soul? A society officially defined by sober Calvinist values was, at this very moment, experiencing an unprecedented explosion of wealth from global trade. Perhaps this flower became a socially acceptable outlet for a kind of flamboyant consumption that was otherwise frowned upon. The debate continues, a quiet academic murmur beneath the story of the coming storm. For now, though, there is no storm. There is only you, standing in a quiet garden, looking at a flower. It's just a plant, rooted in the cold Dutch earth. But you can feel it, a subtle shift in the air. A gentle ripple of desire is starting to spread from this very spot, and no one, not even the old man who guards them so carefully, knows that this quiet ripple will soon become a tidal wave. You step out of the quiet, ordered world of the botanical garden, and the city of Leiden, or perhaps Amsterdam, envelops you. The air changes instantly. The gentle scent of damp earth is replaced by a complex symphony of smells. The sharp temps of tar from shipbuilding yards, the exotic aroma of spices wafting from a warehouse, the hearty smell of baking bread, and the ever-present salty breath of the sea. This is the pulse of the Dutch Golden Age, and it is loud, vibrant, and relentlessly busy. You walk along a canal, its dark water reflecting the tall, impossibly narrow gabled houses that lean against each other as if for support. This unique architecture, a well-known feature of the period, wasn't just for aesthetics. It was a clever response to being taxed based on the width of your house's frontage. So you build narrow and you build high. It's a physical manifestation of the Dutch character, pragmatic, clever, and always with an eye on the bottom line. The streets are a clatter of wooden clogs on cobblestones, the shouts of merchants haggling in a dozen languages, and the creak and groan of pulley systems, hoisting goods up to the top floors of these slender homes. This isn't a kingdom of ancient landed aristocracy. It's a republic of merchants, sailors, and bankers. The power here is new, liquid, and global. You see ships crowding the harbor, their masts a dense forest against the sky. These aren't just fishing boats. They are the great vessels of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, Verenigd Oostindische Company. This company, a historical titan, was more than just a trading firm. It was practically a state within a state. It could mint its own coins, wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies. It was the world's first multinational corporation, and it was funneling the wealth of Asher spices, silks, porcelain directly into the pockets of the men you see walking past you. These men are dressed in sober, dark colors, mostly black and grey, as their Calvinist faith encourages modesty and shuns ostentation. But look closer. The black of a merchant's coat is the deepest, richest dye money can buy. His white collar is not simple linen, but starched, intricate lace of the finest quality. Their wealth isn't shouted. It's whispered in the quality of their cloth, the cut of their coats, the quiet confidence in their posture. This new, staggering wealth had to go somewhere. It went into commissioning portraits from painters like Rembrandt, into building those tall, elegant canal houses, and into collecting rare and beautiful objects. And here's a peculiar little detail about this society: its obsession with cleanliness and order. You'll see housewives on their knees, scrubbing the patch of pavement, the stoop in front of their homes, with ferocious dedication. This wasn't just for hygiene. It was a public declaration of one's moral and domestic virtue. A clean stoop meant an orderly, God-fearing household. This desire for order and control in their immediate environment provides a fascinating contrast to the chaotic, high-risk global ventures that were making them rich. It's a society that gambles on a shipment of cloves from the other side of the world, but insists on a spotless doorstep. This drive for order also contributed to one of Europe's highest literacy rates. Contracts, ledgers, and shipping manifests were the lifeblood of this economy. Most people, even of modest means, could read, write, and do arithmetic. This widespread literacy would become a crucial, if unforeseen, ingredient in the madness to come. After all, you can't have a speculative bubble based on written contracts if no one can read them. Now, historians still argue about the true engine of this golden age. Was it purely the Protestant work ethic, a culture of thrift, hard work, an ingenuity that allowed this small, waterlogged country to dominate global trade? Or did it have a darker, more complex foundation built on the often brutal exploitation of resources and people in its colonies across the sea? The answer, as is often the case in history, is likely a messy combination of both. The same man who debated theology on a Sunday could be ruthless in his business dealings on a Monday. So, you stand on a bustling bridge, watching it all unfold. A society flush with new money, full of ambitious people looking for the next big thing. They are educated, numerate, and possessed of a strange mix of pious sobriety and daring, speculative greed. The stage is perfectly set. All it needs is a catalyst. Something rare, something beautiful, something that everyone can desire but only a few can possess. And that thing, as you know, is currently sitting in a few well-tended gardens, looking deceptively simple, like a mere flower. But in this superheated environment of new wealth and social climbing, it's about to become something else entirely. It's about to become an idea, a symbol, a promise of a fortune waiting to be plucked. From the earth, you find yourself back in a garden, but this one is different from Clusius's academic sanctuary. This is the private garden of a wealthy merchant, a man who has managed, through connections or perhaps a bit of larceny, to acquire a few precious tulip bulbs. He walks you through his meticulously planned parterres, but his pride and joy are the tulips, standing in their own raised bed like royalty. He points to one in particular. It's not a solid color like the ones you saw in Leiden. This one is a vibrant crimson, but its petals are streaked and feathered with brilliant flashes of pure white, like lightning captured in a flower. He calls it a broken tulip. To you, it looks like a work of art, a masterpiece of natural chaos. He tells you its name, something grand like Viceroy or Semper Augustus. The names themselves are a form of marketing, regal, timeless, and expansive sounding dot. What you and the merchant don't know is that this breathtaking beauty is the result of a disease. This is the mainstream historical anchor of this chapter. The tulip-breaking virus. It's a mosaic virus, spread by aphids, that infects the bulb and disrupts the flower's ability to produce a single, solid color pigment. This breaking of the color pattern was unpredictable and, crucially, could not be reliably reproduced from seed. If you planted the seeds of a spectacular broken tulip, you'd just get a plain, solid-colored flower. The only way to propagate an existing pattern was through the bulb's offsets, the little baby bulbs that grew off the main one. This made the truly beautiful, exotically patterned tulips incredibly rare. The merchant sighs dramatically. He explains that this is both a blessing and a curse. The virus that creates this beauty also weakens the bulb, making it more fragile and shortening its lifespan. Every year is a gamble. Will the offsets survive? Will they produce the same glorious pattern? This inherent scarcity and unpredictability is what's starting to transform a simple flower into a high-stakes luxury good. It's a genetic lottery, and everyone wants a winning ticket. Now for a wonderfully strange and slightly disgusting bit of trivia related to this. Some desperate growers, trying to induce this coveted breaking in their plain tulips, resorted to some truly bizarre folk remedies. They would mix soil with old plaster, pigeon droppings, or even diseased human blood. There was a belief that the corruption in these materials might somehow transfer to the bulb and break its color. Of course, none of this worked. It just highlights the desperation and the complete lack of scientific understanding at the time. All they knew was that sometimes, by sheer luck, a plain flower would transform into a priceless treasure. You watch. As the merchant gently touches a petal, his expression a mixture of awe and anxiety. He sees the streaks of white not as a symptom of sickness, but as a divine brushstroke. In this deeply religious society, it wasn't hard for people to rationalize this phenomenon. They saw it as God's artistry, a sign of his boundless creativity, not the work of a microscopic pathogen carried on the back of a garden pest. This is where the line between horticulture and high art begins to blur. The tulip is no longer just a plant. It is a unique, living sculpture. And like a painting by a great master, its value is determined by its rarity, its beauty, and the intensity of the desire it provokes in others. The most sought-after patterns, the ones with the most dramatic flames and feathers of contrasting color on a pristine background, were given names and became famous in their own right. A Semper Augustus, with its legendary deep carmine red streaks on a white base, was the Holy Grail. There were only ever a dozen or so bulbs in existence at any one time, making them the ultimate status symbol. Historians and botanists today still debate the exact nature and behavior of these historical viral strains. While we understand mosaic viruses now recreating the precise, delicate patterns of a Semper Augustus is virtually impossible. We can see them in the famous Dutch still-life paintings of the era, frozen in time, but the living, breathing, diseased flowers that drove a nation mad are lost to history. Was the virus more potent then? Did certain soil conditions in Holland make the effects more dramatic? It's a small, quiet debate, but it reminds us that at the heart of this economic story is a biological mystery. You leave the merchant to his worried admiration of his sick, beautiful flowers. The air is thick with a new kind of tension. It's the tension of art, of chance, of incredible value locked inside a small, lumpy, brown bulb. The transition is happening. The tulip is moving from a botanist's curiosity to a rich man's prize. The virus, an invisible and misunderstood agent of change, is a silent partner in this transformation, painting masterpieces that no human hand could replicate, and in doing so, it is setting the stage for the collective madness that is about to bloom. The world of the tulip is beginning to shrink, to concentrate. It's moving from the expansive, open-air setting of the garden into the warm, enclosed, and intensely competitive space of the Dutch sitting room. You find yourself invited into the home of one of these successful merchants. From the outside, it's another tall, narrow, sober brick building. But when the heavy oak door swings open, you are ushered into a world of quiet, staggering opulence. The air is warm, smelling of beeswax polish and a crackling peat fire. Dark, heavy wood furniture gleams in the soft light filtering through a leaded glass window. A map of the world, vast and detailed, hangs on one wall, a constant reminder of the source of this comfort. On a table, a silver tray holds delicate porcelain cups and a bottle of imported wine. The men gathered here are the same ones you saw on the streets, dressed in dark wools, their faces serious. But here, in the privacy of this room, the talk is not of freight charges or political squabbles in the Far East. They are talking about tulips. You listen as they speak in hushed, reverent tones. They discuss the merits of an Admiral van der Eyck versus a Generalissimo. They argue about the precise shade of violet in a new variety, the exact feathering on a prized specimen. This is the crucial leap, the mainstream historical fact of this era. The tulip has transcended horticulture. It is now a topic of sophisticated, elite conversation like art or philosophy. Owning a rare bulb grants you entry into this exclusive circle. It gives you something to say, a way to signal your status and refined taste without crassly mentioning the size of your bank account. But there is a problem, a practical one. A tulip bulb spends most of an entire year dormant underground, and when it finally blooms, its glorious, fragile beauty lasts for a week, maybe two if you're lucky. How, then, do you display your incredible investment for the other 50 weeks of the year? You can't hang a bulb on your wall. This is where the Dutch ingenuity for both art and commerce kicks in. Leading to our strange fact for this chapter, the host leads you to a special table. On it, under the best light, lies not a flower, but a book, a tulpenboek. This is a tulip book, a catalogue of a grower's or collector's personal stock. It's a large, handsome volume bound in rich leather. He opens it with the same care a priest would handle a sacred text. The pages are not paper, but vellum-thin prepared animal skin, and on each page is a single, life-size, exquisitely detailed watercolor painting of a tulip. Each painting is a masterpiece of botanical illustration, capturing the exact pattern, the subtle gradations of color, the unique character of each broken bloom. Beside each illustration is the flower's name, and sometimes its weight. You are looking at a portrait gallery of flowers. This was the solution. When the flowers themselves had withered, their portraits remained. These books became status symbols in their own right, commissioned from talented artists for enormous sums. A merchant could sit with a potential buyer in the dead of winter, flip through his tulip book, and sell a bulb that was currently just a lump of organic matter buried in frozen soil, based solely on its beautiful, painted promise. This, of course, raises a question that historians still debate. Was this truly about aesthetic appreciation, or was it already a form of abstract finance disguised as a love for flowers? Were these men admiring a work of art, or were they reviewing a portfolio? Of assets, the line is incredibly blurry. They were creating a market for something that was, for most of the year, invisible and intangible. They were trading in pictures, in ideas, in the future potential of beauty. It's a surprisingly modern concept. Wrapped in 17th century velvet and vellum, you look around the room. The men are no longer just merchants. They are collectors, connoisseurs, and gamblers, all rolled into one. The tulip has given them a new language of competition. Before, they could only compete on the size of their ships or the success of their voyages. Now they can compete on the rarity of a petal's streak, the elegance of a bloom's name. It's a more subtle and, in their minds, more civilized form of rivalry. It's not just about being rich. It's about having the most beautiful, the most unobtainable thing that money or credit could buy. The fire crackles, casting long shadows on the wall map. The world outside, with its risks and its realities, feels very far away. In this room, value is being redefined. It's no longer tied to something you can hold, weigh, or use. It's tied to a shared, collective belief in the beauty and rarity of a single, diseased flower. A flower that, for all its glory, you can't even look at for most of the year except in a painting. The leap from the garden to the sitting room is complete. The next leap into pure speculation is just around the corner. You push open the heavy, damp-swelled door of a tavern in a city like Harlem or Alkmaar, and the refined quiet of the merchant's home dissolves instantly. You're hit by a wall of sound and smell. The air is thick and hazy, a soupy mix of sweet pipe smoke, spilled ale, the sharp, juniper-scented tang of Geneva, the Dutch predecessor to Ginand the close. Human smell of dozens of men packed into a low-beamed room. The soft glow of candlelight barely penetrates the gloom, reflecting off pewter tankards and flushed, excited faces. This is the next stage of the mania, and a crucial one. The trade has escaped the drawing rooms of the super-rich and spilled out into the public sphere. The men here are not just the wealthy elite. You see a baker, his forearms still dusted with flour, standing next to a weaver, his fingers stained with indigo. You see clerks, butchers, and skilled artisans, men of the solid middle class. They've heard the stories. They've seen their richer neighbors flaunting their new floral wealth, and they want in. The tavern has become the new stock exchange. This migration of trade to public inns is our central historical fact for this chapter. These informal gatherings, known as collegia or colleges, were where the real, frenetic trading among the general populace took place. There's no ticker tape, no computer screens. The system is raw, verbal, and fueled by alcohol. You watch as a man, perhaps a bricklayer, stands on a stool. He holds up not a bulb, but a slip of paper. He shouts out the name of a tulip, maybe. A respectable mid-tier variety, like a Gouda or an Admiral Van Horn. He's not selling the flower itself, but the right to own it come springtime. Immediately, the room erupts. Bids are shouted from every corner. Men wave their hands, slam their tankards on the scarred wooden tables to get the seller's attention. The price climbs rapidly, in increments of guilders, the silver currency of the day. The energy is infectious, a mix of greed, hope, and mob psychology. You can feel the collective belief in the room. This is not just a flower, it's a ladder. It's a way to climb out of your station in a single season. And here we find a wonderfully specific, niche custom of these tavern trades, the payment of wine coup, or wine money. When a deal was struck at a final price, the buyer didn't have to pay the full amount right away. Instead, to seal the bargain, they paid a small percentage, perhaps 2.5%, immediately and in cash. This small sum was called the wine money. Part of it went to the seller as a deposit, and a portion went to the innkeeper for hosting the trade and acting as an informal witness and broker. This fee for the host was called lasgeld. The rest of the wine money, true to its name, was often spent on a round of drinks for everyone involved. To toast the successful transaction, you watch as the bricklayer's paper is sold to the weaver, for a price that likely exceeds the weaver's annual income. The weaver, his face beaming, counts out a few heavy coins onto the table. The innkeeper scoops them up, gives a portion back to the bricklayer, and calls for the barmaid to bring another round of Geneva. A handshake, a boisterous cheer, and the deal is done. A fortune, or at least the promise of one, has just changed hands, sealed by a sip of gin and a few pieces of silver. But was this actually a legally binding contract? This is a question that legal and economic historians still argue about fiercely. Looking back at these smoky tavern scenes, some see the nascent beginnings of a modern futures market, with down payments, brokers, and publicly agreed upon prices. They argue that these were serious commercial agreements intended to be honored. Others, however, see something far less formal. They argue that these were essentially gambling debts. They weren't recorded by official notaries, and it was highly questionable whether a court would enforce a contract for a tulip bulb scribbled on a napkin in a pub. In this view, the only thing enforcing the deal was a man's honor and the immense social pressure of the collegium. To back out would be to lose face, to be branded a cheat and be ostracized from the group. You look around at the faces in the haze. They don't seem worried about legal theory. They are caught in the moment, in the thrill of the game. The logic seems undeniable. The prices have only ever gone up. The man who bought a bulb for 100 guilders last month sold it for 200 this month. The man who bought it for 200 is confident he'll sell it for 400 next month. It feels safe, it feels certain. The complex, risky world of international shipping, with its pirates and shipwrecks, seems far more dangerous than this. Here, the value is created out of thin air, right in this room, by their own collective desire. The gin is sharp on your tongue, the smoke stings your eyes, but the energy is intoxicating. The barrier to entry has been lowered. You don't need a sprawling estate or a fleet of ships anymore. All you need is a bit of cash for the wine money and the nerve to shout a bid. For now, in the warm, gin-soaked haze of the tavern, it feels like the easiest money in the world. The seasons are turning. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the summer gardens and autumn taverns is giving way to the cold, stark quiet of a Dutch winter. The canals begin to freeze over, the sky is a permanent, pearly grey, and the precious tulip bulbs are now deep underground, sleeping beneath a layer of frost-dusted earth. The trade should, by all logic, stop. There are no flowers to see, no bulbs to exchange. But the fever doesn't break with the cold. It adapts. It evolves into something new, something abstract and strange. You are no longer just trading flowers. You are now participating in what the Dutch called handel in de wind, literally, trade in the wind. This is the core historical development of the winter of 1636 to 37. It is, in essence, a full-blown futures market. No physical bulbs change hands. Not a single lump of dirt is disturbed. Instead, you are trading paper. You are buying and selling contracts, promissory notes for bulbs that will not be dug up until the following summer. You find yourself huddled in the back room of a tavern, but the boisterous, ale-fueled bidding of a few months ago has been replaced by a more intense, almost frantic scribbling. Men pass slips of paper back and forth. They aren't discussing the beauty of the flowers anymore. They are discussing futures prices for delivery in May. The conversation is about margins, premiums, and the ever-upward trajectory of the market. The tulip itself has become almost irrelevant. The paper is the prize, and this leads to a truly bizarre feature of the wind trade, the concept of sequentially linked contracts. You might buy a contract for a viceroy bulb from a baker, who bought it last week from a weaver, who bought it the month before from a clerk. The bulb itself is still in the ground, owned by some anonymous grower you've never met. You have no idea if it's healthy, if it will even sprout. You are purely trading on the belief that someone else, further down the line, will buy the contract from you for a higher price before the delivery date ever arrives. The goal wasn't to end up with the tulip. The goal was to get out with a profit. Before the music stopped, it was a game of hot potato played with ink and paper. This abstraction of value created a kind of financial ghost that haunted the market. A single, not yet existing bulb could generate immense paper wealth as its contract was traded again and again, each time at a higher price. It was wealth created from nothing but collective optimism and a shared delusion, economic historians, of course, have a field day debating this. Was the handle in de wind a sophisticated, its early form of modern financial derivatives, a necessary innovation to allow the market to continue through the off-season? From this perspective, the Dutch were pioneers, creating a complex financial instrument out of pure ingenuity, or was it simply a collective gambling addiction that had spun completely out of control? This latter view sees it not as a market, but as a casino where the chips were slips of paper promising a flower. The contracts were so informal, and the enforcement so uncertain, that it had all the hallmarks of a betting ring rather than a legitimate exchange. The debate itself highlights the dual nature of the phenomenon. It was both a brilliant financial concept and a spectacular, reckless gamble. You hold a small, signed note in your hand. It promises you one bulb of a mid-range variety, deliverable in 6 months. You paid 50 guilders for it. Just yesterday, someone offered you 80. You refused, confident you could get 100 next week. The cold winter air doesn't seem to touch the feverish hope in these back rooms. The wind howls outside, but the real wind trade is happening right here. It's a trade built on air, on promises, on a shared, breathless conviction that the prices will rise forever, lifting everyone to riches on their invisible currents. For now, the wind is at your back. The year turns to 1637. The winter is deep and unforgiving, but the speculative fever has reached its absolute peak. The numbers being thrown around in the smoky taverns and back rooms have become untethered from any semblance of reality. You hear stories that feel like fables, whispers of transactions so outlandish they are hard to believe. This is the zenith of the mania, where the line between investment and insanity is completely erased. The most legendary transaction, one that has become the defining symbol of this period, is the barter for a single bulb. It wasn't even a top-tier Semper Augustus, but a highly prized viceroy. The mainstream historical account, repeated in pamphlets and chronicles after the crash, lists the goods exchanged for this one bulb. Listen to this inventory and try to picture it all piled up: 2 lasts of wheat, 4 lasts of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 fat swine, 12 fat sheep, 2 hogsheads of wine, 4 tons of beer, 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a complete bed with linens, a suit of clothes, and a silver drinking cup. You try to imagine it, a small mountain of grain, a herd of livestock, barrels of drink and food, furniture, all of it traded away for a single, dormant bulb that you couldn't even see. It's a price that could feed and house a family for years. This list, whether perfectly accurate or slightly embellished, captures the sheer absurdity of the peak. The tulip was no longer being valued against currency, but against the very substance of life itself. And in this atmosphere of madness, comical and tragic mistakes were bound to happen. This brings us to a niche and possibly apocryphal story that perfectly illustrates the disconnect between the tulip's perceived value and its physical reality. The story is of a foreign sailor just returned from a long voyage who knew nothing of the flower craze. A merchant had left a priceless tulip bulb. Some say it was a Vander Akeworth 3,000 guilders on his counter. The sailor, seeing what he thought was an unusual type of onion, pocketed it, thinking it would be a nice, savory accompaniment to his morning breakfast of red herring. He was later found contentedly finishing his meal, having consumed a small fortune. The merchant was, as you can imagine, inconsolable. This story, real or not, was told and retold as a cautionary tale. It highlights how the value was entirely in the mind. To an outsider, it was just an onion. To an insider, it was a mansion. But did these incredible, headline-grabbing trades actually take place? Here, modern historians urge caution and spark a fascinating debate. Historians like Anne Golger have meticulously researched the archives and found very little hard evidence of these grand barter trades being completed. There are no notarized deeds swapping a house for a bulb. The famous list of goods for the viceroy comes from a pamphlet published after the crash, likely as a piece of moralizing propaganda to show how foolish everyone had been. The debate, therefore, is whether the peak of the mania was a reality of completed transactions, or a mania of words, a frenzy of boasts, offers, and paper contracts that were never actually fulfilled at their most absurd heights. It's possible that someone agreed to trade their house for a bulb, but when it came time to sign the papers, the deal quietly fell through. The story of the mania may have been just as inflated as the prices themselves. You, however, are living in the moment, not in the historical archive. And in this moment, the stories feel real. They fuel the fire. If a viceroy is worth a pile of goods, then surely your humble Gouda bulb is worth a small cartload. Every conversation, every rumor of a fantastic price reinforces your belief that you are on the right side of history. The air crackles with paper wealth. The numbers climb higher and higher, leaving reason and caution far, far below. You are standing on the very top of a mountain, and the view is dizzying, exhilarating, and utterly unreal. The intoxicating view from the top of the mountain has a powerful allure. It draws the eye not just of the wealthy merchants and daring speculators, but of everyone. The dream of effortless wealth trickles down from the Grand Canal houses and noisy taverns into the quiet workshops and humble homes of ordinary people. You see it in the eyes of your neighbor. Your neighbor is a carpenter, a good one. His hands are calloused and strong, skilled at shaping wood into sturdy furniture and reliable structures. His life has a predictable, comforting rhythm: work, family, church, but lately that rhythm has been disrupted. You see him talking in hushed, excited tones with men he normally wouldn't associate with clerks and brokers' assistants. You see him poring over crumpled price lists by candlelight, his face a mask of hope and complex calculations. This is the next crucial stage of the mania. Its democratization. The belief becomes so widespread that it's no longer a game for the rich, but a national obsession. You watch one morning as your neighbor does something unthinkable. He loads his tools, his saws, his planes, his chisels, the very instruments of his livelihood, to a cart. He is selling them, he is liquidating his past and his present for a stake in the future. A future that, he has been convinced, will be paved with gold harvested from tulip bulbs. He plans to use the money to buy a single contract for a promising mid-tier bulb. It's a move of desperate, breathtaking optimism. This desire to make the trade more accessible to the common person led to a specific and fascinating innovation. Our strange detail for this section: to facilitate trade at lower price points, the bulbs were notionally divided into tiny units of weight called azon. 1 oz was about 1/20th of a gram. This allowed people of modest means, like your carpenter neighbor, to buy what were essentially fractional shares of a tulip bulb. You couldn't afford a whole Gouda. No problem, you could buy 10 azun of it. This micro-trading made the speculation feel less like a huge, risky purchase and more like buying a lottery ticket. It lowered the barrier to entry, drawing in thousands of new, inexperienced players. The story of the common man liquidating his assets to join the tulip trade is a cornerstone of the classic telling of this history. But did it really happen on a massive, society-altering scale? This is where historians again voice their skepticism. The revisionist view, based on detailed archival work, argues that while some artisans and farmers certainly got involved, the idea of widespread ruin among the lower classes is an exaggeration. The primary players remained the merchant and professional classes. The story of your neighbor selling his tools, while perhaps true in isolated cases, was likely amplified by later writers to create a more dramatic and tragic narrative. The debate centers on whether the mania was a deep, systemic infection that reached every corner of society, or a more localized fever that primarily afflicted those with disposable income and a high tolerance for risk. You don't have the benefit of this historical debate. You only see what's in front of you, the anxious, hopeful face of your neighbor as he sells the tools of his trade. You see the weaver down the street mortgaging his loom. You hear the farmhand in the market talking about pooling his savings with his brothers to buy a single bulb contract. The social fabric feels like it's being stretched thin, pulled taut by this shared, frantic dream. The traditional virtues of Dutch society, hard work, thrift, patience, seem to be dissolving in the face of this dazzling shortcut to wealth. Why spend a lifetime hammering nails when you can make more in a week trading paper? It's a question that hangs in the air, seductive and dangerous. You watch the cart carrying your neighbor's tools rattle down the cobblestone street, and you feel a sense of profound unease. The foundation of your world, built on tangible skills and hard-earned security, feels like it's beginning to shake. The date is early February 1637. The wind trade is at its most frenetic. Prices on paper have reached astronomical levels. The system feels invincible, a perpetual motion machine of escalating value. You find yourself in Haarlem, a city at the very heart of the tulip speculation, entering a familiar tavern for a routine auction of new tulip contracts. The air should be thick with anticipation, the room buzzing with the energy of easy money. But tonight, something is wrong. You take your seat, and the usual boisterous greetings are more subdued. Men nurse their drinks, avoiding eye contact. There's a tension in the room that feels different from the usual competitive excitement. It's a nervous, brittle energy. The auctioneer, a man whose voice usually booms with confidence, clears his throat and begins. He calls out the first lot. A contract for a popular variety, one that had doubled in price last week. He announces the starting bid. And then silence. A deep, profound, and utterly unnerving silence. No one shouts a bid. No one waves a hand. The auctioneer repeats the price, his voice a little strained now. Men shift in their seats. They look at the floor, at the ceiling, at each other, their faces a mix of confusion and dawning fear. This moment, this specific, failed auction in Haarlem, is the mainstream historical event that marks the turning point. It's the first tiny crack in the magnificent crystal palace of the tulip market. What is so strange about this moment is its quietness. The crash didn't begin with a bang, but with a whisper, a collective, unspoken realization swept through the room. What if the price doesn't go up? What if the person I buy this from today is the last person in the chain? For the first time, people weren't looking forward to the next buyer. They were looking around for the greater fool, and were terrified that it might be them. The psychology had flipped in an instant. Greed was replaced by a cold, sharp spike of fear. This sudden halt has, of course, been the subject of intense historical debate. What caused this specific silence on this specific night? There was no single catastrophic event. Some historians suggest that the sheer absurdity of the prices had finally reached a tipping point, a level so high that even the most optimistic speculator had to pause. Others point to more practical concerns. The plague was still a recurring threat in the Netherlands, and some argue that a fresh outbreak in Harlem may have diverted money and attention, causing key investors to pull back. Still others believe a small group of highly influential professional traders, known as florists, may have quietly decided amongst themselves that the peak had been reached and began to sell, triggering a domino effect of doubt. There is no consensus, only theories trying to explain the precise moment when the spell was broken. You are sitting in that silent room. The fire in the hearth seems to suck the air out of the tavern. The auctioneer tries again with another lot, lowering the starting price. Still nothing, just the shuffling of feet and a few nervous coughs. The silence is louder than any shouted bid. It's the sound of a bubble bursting. It's the sound of paper wealth evaporating into the smoky air. Someone quietly gets up and walks out, then another. Soon the room is half empty. The auction is abandoned. You step out into the cold night air. The world looks the same. The stars are in the same place, but everything has changed. The shared dream that had held an entire nation captive has just dissolved in a quiet, smoky room. The panic hasn't started yet. For now, there is only a strange, hollow feeling in the pit of your stomach. The wind that had been at your back has suddenly, terrifyingly, stopped blowing. The silence from the Harlem auction doesn't remain contained for long. News travels fast in the densely packed, highly literate Netherlands. It moves through whispers in taverns, in hurried notes passed between brokers, and in the worried conversations on canal bridges. The crack in the Crystal Palace spiders outwards with terrifying speed. The hollow feeling in your stomach begins to curdle into active, gut-wrenching panic. The psychology of the market has inverted. Just a week ago, everyone was a desperate buyer, terrified of missing out on the next price increase. Now, in the space of a few days, everyone is a desperate seller, terrified of being the last one holding a worthless contract. You see men who were swaggering with confidence just last week now scurrying through the streets, their faces pale with anxiety, clutching their precious slips of paper. They are hunting for the buyers who had agreed to their deals, trying to force them to honor the contracts. This frantic search for buyers who have vanished is the central, chaotic experience of this moment. You join the desperate throngs. You go to the house of the man who promised to buy your Gouda contract for 100 guilders. You knock on the door. When he answers, he doesn't invite you in. He laughs in your face. 100 guilders. For that, I wouldn't give you 10 for it now. He slams the door, and you are left on the cold stoop with a piece of paper that is rapidly losing its meaning. This leads to a peculiar and sad spectacle, the blame game. With the dream of wealth shattered, people immediately started looking for someone to blame. This is our strange detail for this section. It wasn't enough to accept that they had been caught in a collective folly. Instead, they blamed the floristan, the professional traders, for manipulating the market. They blamed the government for not stepping in sooner. They even blamed foreign influences for corrupting their honest Dutch market. Finger became a national sport overnight, a way to deflect the shame and the painful reality of their own misjudgment. You hear arguments breaking out everywhere. Men who were toasting each other as business partners a fortnight ago are now accusing each other of being cheats and swindlers in the street. The social fabric stretched thin by greed, now tears apart with acrimony. Was this truly a crash in the modern sense, like a stock market collapse where billions are wiped out in a day. This is a point of significant historical debate. Many revisionist historians argue that it was less of a crash and more of a freeze, because so many of the wind trade deals were on credit and had not yet been settled. Vast sums of actual hard currency had not yet changed hands. It wasn't that everyone's life savings were instantly vaporized. Rather, the entire system of contracts simply locked up. The paper promises became unenforceable, leading to a cascade of defaults and disputes rather than a single massive financial implosion. The wealth that disappeared was wealth that had never truly existed in the first place. Beyond the ink on the page, you don't care about these distinctions. All you know is that the contract in your hand, the one your neighbor sold his tools for, is now worthless. The optimistic glow of the past few months has been replaced by a grim, grey reality. The panic is not just financial, it's existential. It's the realization that the entire edifice of value was built on nothing more than a shared story, and the story has just ended. The silence of the auction has become a roar of panic in the streets. Everyone is running for the exit, but they are discovering that the exit door was just a painting on the wall. The chaotic panic in the streets eventually gives way to a grim, stubborn stalemate. The shouting dies down, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. You are now in the cold, hard reality of the aftermath. You are sitting at your kitchen table, and on that table lies the source of all your recent hope and current misery. The contract, the promise written on the wind. You stare at the elegant swirls of ink, the confident signature of the buyer, the impossibly high price. Just a month ago, this piece of paper felt heavy with potential, like a bar of gold. Now it feels like what it is, a fragile piece of parchment worth less than the firewood you'll use to heat your home tonight. This is the central experience of the post-crash world, the confrontation with the worthlessness of these abstract promises. Sellers, or winners on paper, refuse to accept that their fortunes were imaginary. Buyers, the losers on paper, refuse to pay life-altering sums of money for bulbs whose market price had collapsed by 95% or more. The entire wind trade, which had seemed so clever and modern, was now a tangled mess of broken promises. You and thousands like you are stuck holding these contracts, these ghosts of wealth. This impasse led to a very specific and rather pathetic series of events. This is our strange fact for the chapter. Groups of growers and traders, desperate to enforce their contracts, tried to take matters into their own hands. They held their own informal courts, summoning buyers and trying to shame them into paying. You might receive a summons to one of these gatherings, held in the same tavern where the deal was struck, but there's no celebratory mood now. It's a somber affair where a panel of grim-faced florists would demand that the buyer honor his word. These pseudo-courts had no legal authority, relying solely on social pressure and appeals to a man's honor. For the most part, they failed. Buyers would simply not show up, or they'd offer a tiny fraction of the agreed price, which was indignantly refused. This brings the entire crisis to the doorstep of the legal system, and to the core of a historical debate that continues to this day. Were these handel in the wind contracts legally enforceable in the first place? Dutch law at the time had provisions against gambling. The key question for the courts was, Is a futures contract for a tulip a legitimate commercial instrument or a simple wager on a future price? Legal scholars and historians are still divided. Some argue that, given the context of the highly commercial Dutch society, they should have been seen as legitimate business deals. Others maintain they were so speculative and detached from the underlying asset that they were undeniably gambling debts, which Dutch courts were not inclined to enforce. This legal ambiguity paralyzed the entire system. No one knew where they stood. You can't take your contract to a magistrate with any confidence. The man who signed it knows this. His signature, once a binding seal of his honor, is now meaningless. The promise was written on the wind, and when the wind stopped blowing, the words dispersed into nothing. You look out your window, the world is carrying on, the baker is baking bread, the shipper is loading his vessel. The real economy, the one based on tangible goods and services, is still functioning. But you and the other participants of the tulip trade are trapped in a parallel world, a world of phantom debts and illusory riches. The weight of your worthless contract pins you to your chair. The silence in your home is heavy with the knowledge that you gambled and lost, but the cruelest part is that you're not even sure what the rules of the game were. The tangled mess of broken contracts and bitter disputes could not be resolved in the taverns or by social pressure. The problem was too big, too widespread. It finally landed with a heavy thud in the lap of the authorities. You find yourself, along with hundreds of others, petitioning the city magistrates and eventually the court of Holland. You are no longer looking for a buyer. You are looking for justice, or at least a resolution. You stand in a cold, imposing government hall. The chaos of the streets is replaced by a slow, bureaucratic procedure. Men in dark robes listen patiently to endless testimony. The mood is not one of panic, but of weary resignation. This is the stage where the government finally and reluctantly intervened, which is our central historical fact for this chapter. In late February 1637, the Dutch provincial authorities officially suspended all tulip contracts, essentially pressing pause on the entire disaster. They needed time to figure out what to do. The courts were overwhelmed. The economy, while not collapsing, was being disrupted by the endless disputes. Finally, after months of deliberation, they came up with a solution. It was a characteristically Dutch compromise, pragmatic, messy, and designed to displease everyone as little as possible. The final resolution, announced in a government proclamation, was that all futures contracts signed during the frenzy could be voided if the buyer paid a small compensation fee to the seller. And here is the strange, specific detail. The amount of this fee, the government decreed that buyers could be released from their wind trade contracts by paying just 10% of the originally agreed upon price. Later, this was even reduced in some areas to as low as 3.5%. Imagine that. The man who promised to pay you 1,000 guilders for your contract now legally only owed you 35. It was a way to clear the books and force everyone to move on. But it felt deeply unfair to all involved. The sellers, who believed they were millionaires, on paper felt cheated out of 90 to 97% of their rightful winnings. The buyers, forced to pay a fee for a contract on a flower that was now just a flower again, felt like they were paying for nothing. They were paying a penalty for a game everyone had been playing. There were no winners. The government's solution didn't restore fortunes. It simply formalized the losses in a way that prevented a complete breakdown of civil order. This government intervention is naturally a subject of robust debate among economic historians. Was this a wise and necessary move to prevent a deeper social and economic crisis by providing a clear, albeit painful, exit ramp? Did the authorities prevent years of legal battles that would have clogged the courts and poisoned commercial relationships? Or was it a terrible precedent? By failing to enforce the contracts, did the government essentially state that speculative bubbles have no real consequences and that gambling debts can be officially sanctioned and dismissed? Some argue it was a brilliant piece of crisis management, while others see it as a failure of nerve that undermined the sanctity of contracts. A cornerstone of a commercial society, you leave the government hall with the official proclamation. In your hand there is no joy, no sense of victory, just a grim finality. Your contract, once worth a fortune, is now legally redeemable for a pittance, barely enough to cover the cost of the paper it was written on. The government hasn't saved you. It has simply drawn a line under your loss and told you to go home. The great tulip adventure is over, ending not with a triumphant boom or a catastrophic bust, but with the dry, legalistic rustle of a government decree. You have your answer, but it's not the one you wanted. Spring arrives. It always does. The ice on the canals melts. The grey skies soften into blue, and in gardens all across the Netherlands, the tulips bloom. They push up through the soil, oblivious to the chaos and ruin that was waged in their name, and they are beautiful. Crimson, violet, yellow, and the famous feathered broken varieties. They are just as stunning as they were last year. But now you see them differently. You walk through the city, and the fever is gone. The main historical reality of the aftermath is this: life goes on. The Dutch economy, contrary to the most dramatic retellings, did not collapse. The nation was not plunged into a multi-generational depression. The engine of the Golden Age, the trade in spices, herring, timber, and textiles was so powerful and diverse that the bursting of the tulip bubble was, for the nation as a whole, a painful but not a fatal wound. The baker still bakes. The carpenter, if he was lucky enough to buy his tools back, still builds. And the ships of the VOC still sail for the East. But something has changed. There is a lingering sense of shame and embarrassment in the air. This brings us to our peculiar detail for this chapter, the tulip shame. For years, even decades after 1637, the tulip mania became a subject of ridicule and a go-to moral lesson. Satirical pamphlets and poems were published, mocking the foolishness of the speculators. Preachers thundered from the pulpits about the sin of greed. You might see a popular print being sold in the market, depicting a fool in a tulip hat leading a crowd of greedy speculators off a cliff. The tulip, once a symbol of taste and wealth, was now a symbol of folly. People simply stopped talking about it. It became a collective, awkward memory that was best left in the past. The depth of the social and economic scars left by the mania is a topic historians still explore. Did this experience fundamentally alter the Dutch national character? Some argue that it did, that it inoculated the Netherlands against similar speculative manias for centuries to come, reinforcing the traditional values of thrift and caution. They suggest it created a deep-seated suspicion of get-rich-quick schemes. Others argue its impact was more limited. They point out that speculation continued in other markets, and that the tulip mania was seen more as a bizarre, one-off Eventan anomaly rather than a systemic lesson. The debate is about whether the trauma was deep and transformative or shallow and quickly forgotten by a nation focused on the serious business of global trade. You pass a garden where a magnificent Semper Augustus is in full bloom. Its crimson flames on a white background are breathtaking. Last year, the sight of it would have made your heart pound with a mixture of avarice and awe. You might have calculated its worth in guilders, in houses, in lifetimes of labor. Now you just see a flower, a beautiful, rare, and delicate flower, nothing more. Its economic value has been stripped away, leaving only its aesthetic value behind. You watch your neighbor, the carpenter, tending to a small patch of common tulips in his own yard. He managed to recover, to rebuild his life. He smiles as he weeds around them. He's not looking at a failed investment. He's looking at his garden. The air is clean again. The phantom wealth has dissipated. The frantic energy is gone, replaced by the steady, familiar hum of daily life. The great madness has passed, leaving behind a quiet lesson, a lingering sense of shame, and thousands upon thousands of beautiful, silent flowers. You find yourself in a quiet, modern place, perhaps a library or a university study, years and years after your journey. The scent of old paper and dust hangs in the air. You're looking back, not through the lens of memory, but through the critical eyes of modern history, and you discover that the story you lived through, the dramatic, catastrophic tale of national madness, is itself being questioned. This is the final, fascinating twist in the tale of the tulip mania, its historical re-evaluation, the mainstream story that most of us know, a nation gripped by folly, of sailors eating fortunes, of a national economy brought to its knees, now seen by many historians as a gross exaggeration, a caricature created long after the fact. This modern revisionism is our core focus for this chapter. Historians like Anne Golger, in her landmark book Tulip Mania, did something radical. She went back to the original archives, notarial records, court documents, letters, and what she found was very different from the popular story. She discovered that the number of people who were verifiably bankrupted by the crash was incredibly small. The mania, she argues, was not a nationwide phenomenon, but was largely confined to a relatively small group of merchants and skilled artisans in a few specific cities, primarily Haalem. This leads us to a specific and very important, strange fact, or rather, a strange source. Much of the dramatic, sensational story we know comes from a single, highly influential book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, written by a Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay in 1841. That's almost 200 years after the event. Mackay was not a historian. He was a brilliant storyteller who gathered the most dramatic anecdotes, pamphlets, and satirical songs to weave a compelling morality tale about the dangers of speculation. His version of the story, with its ruined families and society in chaos, was so powerful that it has shaped our understanding of the event ever since. In essence, our collective memory of the tulip mania is a piece of Victorian-era sensationalism. So, was it really that mad? This is the ultimate historical debate. The traditional narrative, championed by Mackay, presents a story of pure, irrational madness, a whole society losing its mind over a flower. The revisionist narrative, championed by Goldgar and others, presents a more nuanced picture. They see not madness, but a group of rational, if overly optimistic, actors playing in a new, unregulated financial market. They were using new tools, futures, contracts, to speculate on a new luxury good in a period of unprecedented prosperity. The bubble grew and burst. Yes, but it was a contained financial event, not a national psychosis. The losses were real for those involved, but the story of a whole country being ruined is a myth. You lean back in your chair, surrounded by these conflicting accounts. The story becomes a fascinating puzzle. Which version is true? The one you felt in your gut, the panic, the desperation, the madness in the air, or the one meticulously pieced together from dusty records, a more limited, less dramatic, financial event? Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. Perhaps the feeling of madness was real for those at its epicenter, even if its macroeconomic impact was limited. The story of the Tulip Mania becomes less about economics and more about storytelling itself. It's about how a dramatic narrative, once it takes hold, can become more powerful and more real than the complex, messy reality it purports to describe. The legend of the mania has become more famous than the mania itself. Your journey wasn't just through a financial bubble, but through the birth of a powerful, enduring myth. And so our journey comes to a close. We've traveled from a quiet botanical garden to the boisterous taverns, from the opulent drawing rooms to the cold government halls. We've seen a simple flower become a symbol of wealth, an object of art, a form of currency, and finally a source of shame and a legendary tale. We end where we began, with the tulip itself. After the crash, after the courts had their say, after the shame subsided, the tulip didn't vanish. It simply returned to what it had always been. This is the simple, final historical truth. The Dutch love for tulips endured. They became and remain a cherished part of Dutch culture and a massive, stable export industry. The Netherlands is still synonymous with tulips, but it's a healthy, horticultural love, not a speculative fever. A strange, final detail in this story is the fate of the broken tulips. The beautiful, streaked flowers created by the mosaic virus were eventually understood for what they were: diseased. As horticulture became more scientific, these weakened, unpredictable strains were gradually phased out in favor of healthier, more stable, and genetically solid-colored varieties. The very flowers that drove the mania, the Semper Augustus, the Viceroya now extinct. You cannot buy one for any price. They exist only as ghosts in 17th century paintings, their fragile, diseased beauty captured forever in oil paint. This leads us to our final, quiet reflection, which isn't so much a debate as it is a question you can take with you into your sleep. What is value? The story of the Tulip Mania serves as a timeless, almost perfect parable for this question. It shows how value can be a collective belief, a story we all agree to tell each other. And when that story changes, when the belief falters, the value can vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the tangible objective lump of organic matter in the soil. The story teaches us that a thing is not just worth what someone will pay for it today, but what someone believes another person will pay for it tomorrow. It's a delicate chain of human trust and expectation. The tulip mania was simply the first time this modern psychological mechanism was laid bare on such a grand and spectacular scale. So you are back in your own time, in your own quiet room. The echoes of the tavern shouts and the frantic bidding have faded. The ghost of your worthless contract has dissolved. You are left with the story. A story about human desire, greed, and the strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying power of a shared idea. It's a story about how a society, for a brief, intense moment, looked at a simple flower and saw in its petals the reflection of all their hopes and dreams, and how, just as quickly, they learned that it was only a reflection after all. Juan Herzewe, and now the story is over. The pages of the history book gently close. The lights in the 17th century Dutch houses go out one by one. The frantic energy of the market fades into a distant, muffled echo, like a storm that has passed far over the horizon. All that remains is the quiet, the soft, deep quiet of the night. Let the details of the story begin to soften and blur. The names of the tulips, the figures in guilders, the shouting in the taverns. Let them all drift away, like boats sailing out on a calm, dark sea. Your mind is now a quiet garden, not for speculation, but for rest. The only thing growing here is a sense of peace. Feel the weight of the day lift from your shoulders, replaced by the gentle heaviness of a warm blanket. There are no contracts to worry about, no profits or losses to calculate. There is only the simple, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Inhale, calm, exhale the story. Let each breath carry you a little further away from the waking world, a little deeper into the soft soil of your dreams. The journey is complete. It's time to rest.